besondere Stelle befinden? Sie machen nur die Folien.
Da am besten dann von dem Computer.
So, dear OMA fellows and dear participants to this event, both here in Munich, as well as maybe connected on the internet from CERN, Liverpool, and maybe some other places. Welcome to our public lecture on Maria Sklodowska-Curie and the impact of the Maria Sklodowska-Curie actions on supporting ion beam cancer therapy research in Europe. And I'm very happy that we can actually start this event with a special welcome address from the European Commission Director General, Mrs. Martina Reichertz.
Hello, everybody. Let me start by telling you a short story about Marie Sklodowska-Curie, whose birthday we celebrate today. Once upon a time, 150 years ago, a baby girl was born in Warsaw, in the then Kingdom of Poland, at the time part of the Russian Empire. Her name was Maria Salomea Sklodowska. Most of us know of her today as Marie Curie, a brilliant Nobel laureate who lived and worked in Paris. But who was Marie Sklodowska-Curie? How did she fit in her world? The world during Maria's time was going through very rapid changes. At the time of her birth, there was no electricity, no anesthesia, no airplanes, no cars, and life expectancies was around 40 years. Empires collapsed and disappeared through wars and revolutions. And the natural science was set to go through their most incredible travel of discovery ever. But more than anything else, Maria's world was a man's world. Girls were mostly kept uneducated. The doors to the temples of science, where Maria was determined to live, were almost hermetically shut for women who were considered by society in general as being by nature less able than men in everything, and especially in science. In such a world where there was absolutely no reason to assume that Maria, or any other Maria of her time, would be able to achieve anything significant, certainly not in the difficult world of natural science in which the exposure of every error or weakness in anyone's work is a way of life. But by the time this girl reached the age of 44, she could look at most scientists fairly as lesser achievers. She had discovered and isolated polonium and radium. She had discovered radioactivity. She had won 2 Nobel Prizes. And she was the first woman to be awarded a Nobel Prize at the age of 37. She was invited and welcomed to the company of the greatest physicists, such as Einstein and Planck. She was in love with knowledge in an altruistic way. She invented image technology to photograph the interior of the human body, and she went and applied this invention at her own expense to save wounded soldiers. She refused to patent her isolation method in order to allow other scientists to work freely with it. Every age, every society has these heroic examples serving as models of what human beings can and should strive to be. They set the bar very high for most of us, but at the same time serve as moral compasses and source of inspiration. Marie Sklodowska-Curie, despite being a woman in a man's world, fulfilled the heroic requirement. We are celebrating the 150th anniversary of her birth, and she has deservedly and in a positive way achieved the only kind of immortality possible for humans, to be remembered with admiration. Let me now turn very briefly to the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action. It is a program which financially supports researchers in doing the research they choose to do, asking them 2 things. 1, to be excellent in their research and to do in another country. Thus, we help them collaborate and learn from each other and also gain from the experience of living and working in and with different cultures, like Marie Curie did. The Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions are different to almost all research support programs anywhere because they allow the researchers to choose what they do instead of asking them to do what their financial supporters want them to do. That's why we remain loyal to the spirit of Marie Curie. We do not discriminate in any form or shape, and certainly not against women. In this sense, our track record is exemplary. In general, only 30% of researchers are women. For our program, they are above 40. The beneficiaries, more than 100,000 by now, are becoming the builders of a European identity by working abroad and experiencing the cultural diversity of Europe as a Marie Sklodowska-Curie Fellow. I will leave you to continue with the celebrations by expressing our gratitude to Seine, the University of Liverpool, and the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich for organizing this birthday party, and my feeling of hope that the next generation of researchers and European citizens is being incubated with the help of the Marie Curie Sklodowska actions. Have a great day. Thank you.
So, and now, as you see, it was already mentioned, it's the 150 years birthday, but I would like also to recall that 7th of November is, since 2013, also the International Day of Medical Physics. This was proposed by the International Organization for Medical Physics, and indeed the day was chosen in recognition of the pioneering research work of Maria Sklodowska-Curie on radioactivity. And since then, over 80 national organizations and additional affiliated members around the world celebrate every year on November the 7th the impact of medical physics on daily lives of millions of people. And if we look back to what was done in 2013, you see here from the poster, the focus was the impact of medical physics in radiation exposure from medical physics procedures. Then in 2014, it was relating to the advancement of imaging through medical physics. In 2015, it was dedicated to the improvement in radiation oncology through better medical physics. In 2016, it was devoted to education in medical physics, and this year it's related to medical physics for providing a holistic approach to women patients and women staff safety in radiation medicine. But as you see in this poster, indeed today we celebrate and we admire and recognize the legacy of this great woman and this great scientist. And that's why it's really great that upon the coordinator of the OMA network, Professor Welsh, started the initiative to have this birthday party and celebration in 3 locations. There have been earlier today talks given at the University of Liverpool and at CERN in Geneva, and now we are having our event here in Munich. And it is also for me a special honor to hold this lecture since here at LMU, at the Faculty of Physics, we have since 5 years a dedicated chair for medical physics, and this event is also being endorsed by the German Society of Medical Physics, of which I've currently the privilege of serving as a president. And so, if we look now to the history of Maria Sklodowska-Curie, she was born 150 years ago in Warsaw, in Poland, at the time under the Russian Empire. She was the 5th and the youngest child, and coming from a traditional family of teachers, especially exposed to mathematics and physics through her father. She had actually a difficult childhood, not only what it was mentioned before about condition at the time, but her mother passed away when she was only 10 years old, and in general the family struggled due to financial difficulties. However, she was educated, she followed the schools, girl college, and she could finish the gymnasium actually with a gold medal in 1983. And as you heard, she couldn't continue higher education in regular environment since being a woman she was not allowed. But she continued to tutor herself or including also education at this clandestine flying university. And she also had to work to make some savings. And when she had enough money, in 1891, she could join her elder sister and enroll in the University of Paris, where women were allowed, and in order to study physics, chemistry, and mathematics. She graduated in physics in 1893, actually as a best score, starting to work in some industrial laboratory, but continued to study, earning a second degree in mathematics in 1894. And actually through her work, she met Pierre Curie, and at that time, Marie was still planning to go back to her home country in Poland, but she was unfortunately denied a position in Krakow, again as being a woman, and therefore she was convinced by Pierre to pursue her PhD in Paris. And they married in 1895, and indeed they really shared not only love but also a great passion for science. And those years were really exciting years in the physics community. End of 1895 was the discovery of X-ray by William Röntgen in Würzburg, not far away from here. 1 year later, there was reported the observation of Henry Becquerel about the natural radioactivity, and therefore she chose as a thesis to continue to work on these uranium rays. And actually exploiting an instrument, a kind of electrometer, which was developed by her husband and colleague, by measuring ionizing effect of uranium rays in air, she realized that this activity did not depend on the molecular state, but was really an atomic or subatomic property, depending on really on the quantity of uranium. And seeing also the different activity of different minerals, she also realized that there must have been additional substances which had similar feature of radioactivity and actually much more radioactive than uranium. 1897, the first daughter, Irene, was born, and so Marie has also to work at a school to provide for the family, but still continue to work very hard. And Pierre got also interested in her research, so they joined forces, and with these very dedicated studies, they finally succeeded to discover two new naturally radioactive elements, polonium, which was dedicated in the name to her home country of Poland, and the radium, which comes from the Latin word for rays. And then in the next years, just until in these 4 years, either together or separately, they had already 32 publications around the topic. And interestingly enough, we see already the first application of medicine, also reporting the faster destruction of tumor than healthy cells through the radium. Then in 1900, Marie was the first female faculty at the École Normale Supérieure. And in 1903, she finished and got the award of her PhD. But most importantly, as you heard before, in 1903, she received, together with her husband Pierre and Henry Becquerel, the Nobel Prize in Physics for this work on radioactivity. 1 year later was the birth of a second daughter, Eve, and those were very happy years, but just 2 years later there was a big tragedy in her life. Pierre was killed in an accident, and he had meanwhile obtained a chair of physics at the University of Paris, and this chair was then offered to Marie, who accepted this, really aiming to develop this in a world-class laboratory, also in tribute to her husband. And then she continued also her hard work, trying to isolate the isotopes, and she succeeded in 1910 to isolate a really pure radium metal. And also very important, she introduced the definition of radioactive emission using a name which was again dedicated to her passed away husband, Curie. which is also, although it's no longer it's not the international standard, which is nowadays becquerel, but is still in many places still used. And for her work in 1911, she was the first person and first woman to receive a second Nobel Prize, and most important, in a different scientific discipline of chemistry. Then in the later years, she engaged and she succeeded to obtain the establishment of a dedicated institute, the Radium Institute in Paris, which was completed in 1914, and also in Warsaw, which was then opened in 1932. Marie became director of the institute in Paris, and the one in Warsaw was directed by her elder sister. And again, you see that the topics were research in chemistry, physics, and medicine. And in World War I, Marie also realized that soldiers could be better helped close to the battlefield. And so she got a very quick introduction to radiology, and she managed to develop this kind of mobile radiography units, so also called Petit Curie, and also developed some special needles which contain radium emanating substances, later on realized to be radon, also to provide first assistance to the soldier, and she was director of the Red Cross Radiology Service. In the years later, she continued to consolidate her institute and the research. In 1922, she became fellow of the French Academy of Medicine, and 1930, she was elected member of the International Atomic Weights Committee, where she served until her death in 1934. And indeed, Marie Curie left an impressive legacy. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, first and only person to win a Nobel Prize in 2 different scientific disciplines. She was the first woman to become a professor at the University of Paris, and recently, 1995, she was also the first woman to be entombed in the Pantheon in Paris, just due to her own merits. So this is really an impressive legacy. And if we look also to the impact of Marie Curie, not only in the broad field of medicine, but especially of radiation therapy, we can see that whereas in those years with the discovery of the X-rays, there was also a rapid adoption of the X-ray device for radiation therapy, also after the discovery of radium, which was in this form of emanation or salts. This was also investigated how to use this with this kind of different applicators so that the radium could be placed in contact to the disease. And indeed, under her direction, the Curie Institute led world's first studies into the treatment of neoplasm using these radioactive isotopes. And whereas this was limited to natural isotopes, another fundamental discovery for the field was actually done by the daughter, the first daughter of Marie, Irene, which was also working at the Curie Institute. And starting from the work of her parents, Irene, together with her husband, Joliot Curie, demonstrated that it was also possible with special reaction to turn natural element into radioactive isotopes. And for this, she received 1 year after the death of Marie, she received a Nobel Prize for chemistry, again awarded to Irene and her husband. And with this discovery, it was really fundamental, since it enabled to broaden the spectrum of radioactive materials, which could also find application to medicine. And if we look what is nowadays modern radiation therapy, we can say that we can distinguish it in a so-called external beam radiotherapy, where you try to bring the radiation from outside inside the body and in the tumor in order to use the ionizing effect to kill the tumor cells, trying, however, to spare the healthy tissue around, and you probably know most of it using a compact linear accelerator and making special sophisticated delivery system to modulate the fluence of the photon beams in order to achieve this kind of conformity of the dose to the tumor and while sparing the healthy tissue. But still, we also have the usage of radioactive isotopes in brachytherapy, also called sealed source radiation therapy. You bring these radioactive substances either implanted in the tumor or in contact to the region so that they can also make emission, short penetrating emission in order to kill the tumor cells, or in the so-called systemic radioisotope therapy or unsealed source radiation therapy. You bind these radioactive substances to special pharmaceuticals, which will be made such that they will try to accumulate in the tumor region. And so you can introduce those into the body by ingestion or injection, and this will also accumulate in the tumor region and enable a localized destruction of the tumor cells. And you can think that so the role of radioactivity is only in this kind of application, but also if you look at external beam radiation therapy, as I was mentioning before, at the beginning it was used with X-rays, but these X-rays from X-ray tubes were producing just energies of in the region of tens or hundreds of kiloelectron volts, so they were not very penetrating into the body. And indeed, it was the possibility to generate artificially radioactive substances like cobalt-60, which had the typical emission around 1 MeV. And in this way, it was possible to move the distribution. This is the dose as a function of depth. It was possible to bring it more deep into the tumor compared to what was possible with so-called orthovoltage X-ray radiation therapy. And you could put this in this rotating structure so that you could crossfire the radiation from different directions around the patient. And if these are a historical picture, and cobalt was introduced in the 50s, and later on there was the development of a linear accelerator, which replaced most of this machine. Also in modern radiotherapy, we still find cobalt-60, either in this so-called gamma knife, which is also a relatively old idea. In order to treat a very small lesion in the head, you use the special helmet, and there you placed inside the machine, you have cobalt sources which get then collimated, and they crossfire and intersect in order to make a very high radiation damage in a very localized region in the head. And very recently has been put in the market this so-called gamma pod, which has again rotating cobalt sources which produce rays which crossfire and are used for stereotactic treatment of breast tumors. And it's a very huge discussion in radiation therapy that you should not only improve the dose delivery, how to put the radiation in the body, but also how to visualize the anatomy. And to make this visualization with non-ionizing radiation, the best modality known is magnetic resonance imaging. And cobalt was instrumental to make the first machine, this so-called view-ray machine, which was combining radiation therapy with cobalt sources and real-time imaging of patient movement with magnetic resonance imaging. So you see, still now, there is places of even external radiotherapy where we do use these radioactive substances. But if we now come to the link to ion therapy, which is the topic of this lecture, we can see that this story is also a bit intertwined with the discovery of Marie Curie, since we say that the birth of this kind of therapy was the observation of William Bragg, that was in Australia, studying the ionizing curves of radium in air. And here you see the ionization as a function of the distance of the source of air of different sources. So emission of alpha particles. And in his publication in 1904, he reported that the recorded ionization curves brought to light a fact which we believe to have been hitherto unobserved. It is that the alpha particle is a more efficient ionizer towards the extreme end of its course. And if you imagine now to rotate by 90 degrees this graph and to see actually the ionization as a function of depth, we will see that this characteristic shape will be also the famous Bragg peak that we use in ion therapy. But of course, if we had only alpha particle in air, they could travel a few centimeters. If you put dense material, you stop immediately, like with a sheet of paper. And if we want to bring this ionization maximum into the deep tumor, we cannot use emissions from radioactive substances. We need also accelerators. And in 1929, Sir Lawrence proposed that instead of trying to make linear accelerators longer, and longer, we could actually exploit the fact that these are charged particles. And if you use a magnetic field to confine the particle path to some spiral trajectory, and in each of these gaps they get accelerated, you can still obtain a desired acceleration with a more compact footprint compared to what was conceivable with linear accelerator. This was the concept proposed for protons, for which Sir Lawrence also got the Nobel Prize in 1939. If we want to go to heavier ions, like carbon, we need a different kind of accelerator, and this was the synchrotron, which was invented at the end of World War II. And here the idea is that you keep the particle on a fixed trajectory. You first inject it with a linear accelerator to get enough energy, then you keep circulating on a fixed trajectory, and at each turn you make some acceleration until you reach your desired energy for extraction. And this concept was independently proposed by a US scientist, Macmillan, and a Soviet Union scientist, Veskler, who both received later on in 1963 the Shared Atoms for Peace Award. And although these accelerator technology were not designed for medical application, but for fundamental research, as usual, you still need somebody who is a bit visionary, but also aware of what is available in the contemporary world. And this was Robert Wilson, who in 1946 wrote in this very nice short paper on the radiological use of fast protons. He wrote that protons can be used clinically. He knew that accelerators were meanwhile available. And due to the ionizing effect that Sir Bragg has observed, he was aware that it could be possible to bring this maximum of ionization in the tumor so that you could maximize the radiation dose to the tumor with a good sparing of the healthy tissue. And he also suggested that not only protons, but also heavier nuclei, such as very energetic carbon atoms, might become eventually therapeutically practical. And so, maybe not such a fast translation like for X-rays or radium therapy, but from the first article, you see that in 1954, the first patients were treated in Berkeley, in the institution which was, by the way, directed by Sir Lawrence. And in 75, we had the first patient treated in Berkeley with heavy ions. And if we look what does it mean in terms of physics and why these are attractive modalities, we know that when we have a photon radiation impinging in a target, we have an initial build-up due to the secondary electrons which are set in motion, but then we have an exponential attenuation of the radiation, whereas with the ions, we do have this characteristic Bragg peak, so a very high ionization in a very short, small, narrow region, which can be adjusted in depth by changing the beam energy. And although this is too sharp and too small to cover the entire tumor, if we properly modulate the beam energy and intensity, we can achieve a very good conformation of those to the tumor with protons or with heavier ions, with a very good sparing of the healthy tissue before the tumor, as well as no or a minor tail of those after the tumor. And if you combine these physical advantages with modern beam delivery techniques, taking into account that these are charged particles, so you can deflect with a magnetic field, you can reach with energy the desired depth into the tumor, and then you can nicely scan this narrow beam in order to bring the dose very conformal also to very complex tumor shapes. And by doing that, If we compare typical treatment plans, so what you see here is a slice of a X-ray, CT, tomograph of a patient, and here you see the dose deposition into the tumor. For photons, protons, or heavier ions, you see that with heavy ions we get typically a better conformation of a dose to the tumor, and most importantly, a considerable reduction of dose to the healthy tissue and critical organs, which is important to reduce toxicity and risk of developing later on a secondary cancer. And in order to investigate whether this kind of distribution really translates into a benefit for the patient, we need facilities. Of course, this is a very expensive instrumentation, but there has been in the last decades an increasingly growing number of facilities. Nowadays, we have 60 proton therapy facilities worldwide, of which 5 here in Germany, and about 10 carbon ion facilities, of which 6 combined with protons, mostly in Europe and in Asia. And so far, more than 150,000 patients have been treated with ions, which is still a small number compared to photon therapy, but having now more and more facility and much more are in a stage of planning or construction, we can start to make clinical studies in order to see for which indication these modalities can be beneficial. And especially in Europe, a long-term experience with proton has been actually collected at the Orsay Proton Therapy Center, started in 1991, and then expanded with a second cyclotron in 2014. And this is a very modern institute and center which belongs to the Institute Curie, which, as you see, was funded by Marie Curie and is still aimed at providing patient care as well as research and teaching. And since this is very complex technology and highly interdisciplinary field, it's also very important to make networking. And for this reason, 15 years ago, a group of people decided to create a network, so-called the European Network for Light Ion Hadron Therapy, which is involving more than 150 institutions, both clinical centers, academic institutions, industries, over 400 people, and more than 25 countries. And of course, in order also to promote research in this field, you need financial support. And there has been several European funding which promoted networking and improvement of ion therapy. And in particular, I would like to draw your attention in this kind of Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions. And these kind of actions, as we have heard, with a budget of over 6 billion euros until 2020, they provide grants for early and experienced researchers' career, and in particular, they really encourage mobility, transnational, intersectional, and interdisciplinary mobility. There are different types of Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions, and today I will especially concentrate on the innovative training networks and also mention the individual fellowships. And under the lead of this ENLIGHT, the first network around ion therapy was this partner network, particle training network for European hadron therapy, which included 10 academic institutes, research centers, and 2 leading companies in the ion therapy sector. It could support 29 young researchers. You see here the location where they had been going, and all of these researchers not only made very good research that you can actually read in this kind of open access publication, but this was really a very important platform for their further career. Here you see what were the topics covered, very interdisciplinary, from radiobiology, clinical studies, informatics, more engineering on new accelerator, but also physics topics regarding computational aspects, as well as image guidance in hadron therapy. And here you see all the nationalities and of the different researchers which were attracted to these institutions in Europe. And as I was mentioned, all of them succeeded to find later also very good position, and many of them remained actually in the field of this particle therapy, still contributing to the field. I would like just to report an example of Dr. Florian Sommerer, that was the experienced researcher I had the opportunity to supervise when I was still at the Heidelberg Ion Therapy Center at the University Hospital of Heidelberg. And in his work is really providing a pioneer contribution in integrated a general purpose complex Monte Carlo calculation environment into the clinic in order to support more accurate calculation of clinical treatment fields, to support comparison with tools which were established in the clinical routine, which were faster, but in some cases less accurate. And this kind of work is actually was fundamental at that time for the starting up of a new facility, but is still also being used nowadays to support several aspects of particle therapy, and is also resulted in very good publication and international visibility. But we do not only need complex calculation tools, we would like also to have tools in order to monitor where the radiation goes into the patient. And for this there was also a very interesting project funded by the Framework Program 7, so-called Envision. And like in high energy physics, where in order to understand fundamental processes, you interact particles and you put detector outside, and by these products you try to understand what was happening in the collision. Similar, in ion therapy, we put the beam inside the patient to treat the patient, but we could exploit secondary emission in order to try to visualize this beam. And actually for a short time, we really activate the patient so that we can again use these radioactive emissions with this kind of positron emission tomography, or we can also exploit the very energetic photons which are emitted as a result of nuclear reaction. And since these are single photon emission, we need some kind of collimation, and with this kind of knife edge collimator, we can try to localize these from gamma, and then we can co-register them to the anatomical information of the patient, and it's also very challenging to determine when the patient is breathing, how to correlate this to the breathing motion. And this was a very, again, complex and advanced project, and that's why it was also natural to attach a Marie Sklodowska-Curie training network, so-called Enter Vision. And this was again a training network for medical imaging in ion therapy with 10 academic institutes, research center, and the leading company in the proton therapy field, which trained 12 early stage researchers and 3 experienced researchers. Here you see again the geographical distribution of the researchers which moved to these institutes in Europe. We had again PhDs, a lot of visibility, even a patent for one of these first devices in order to visualize the treatment in the patient. And again, you can also assess the scientific outcome in this kind of open access publication. Here I would like to draw your attention about this young early researcher, Marco Pinto, who joined as a Marie Sklodowska-Curie Fellow at the Université Claude Bernard in Lyon from 2011 to 2014, making his PhD on modeling and simulation of physics processes for in-beam imaging. You see his work has been very successful. He joined several experimental campaigns at clinical and research sites, published a lot of papers, even 1 patent, and he later on joined us here at LMU as a postdoctoral researcher, where he continued to develop cutting-edge research on computational topics, both from Monte Carlo as well as analytical topics, in order to make ion therapy more precise. And in the spirit of Marie Sklodowska-Curie, actually continues a wide network around the world with US, Europe, Japan, and Australia, and some of this collaboration already resulted in good visibility works. And after all these networks, which were coordinated by Enlight, we had more recently the University of Liverpool with Professor Welsh, and he started the OMA training network, optimization of medical accelerators, which includes your 15 early stage researchers, which are working on their PhD with individual project-based training and a large opportunity of network activities and events, including the school they are attending now on Monte Carlo. And the consortium features actually more than 30 partner organizations, again, academic, clinical centers, as well as companies. And this is again a sign of a recognition of the importance of research and development at the interface between physics and life science at the European level. And here you see the beneficiaries of this OMA network, but we have even a broader number of partner organizations. Again, with this distributed profile of academic, clinical, and industrial institutions. And here you see all the location of the beneficiaries, and here you see the picture of the fellows who are actually here in this room. And we see again a nice equilibrated distribution in location geographically, as well as a very good gender balance. And they also do a very in multidisciplinary research, trying to develop novel beam imaging diagnostic system, again having studies into treatment optimization, trying to advance complex computational methods like Monte Carlo for both physical and biological calculations and new treatment planning concept, as well as research and development to optimize the facilities in order to ensure the best treatment and optimize patient throughput. And just here also to give you an example, at LMU, our early research fellow is Lian Tian, who made the long way from China to Munich, and is actually trying to combine a bit these activities I was mentioning before. On the one hand, highly sophisticated computational tools with Monte Carlo, and on the other hand, these imaging methods to try to visualize the beam delivery and try to merge them in some new concept for treatment planning. And if you want to learn more, there is a poster here outside. And you can also get further information on the OMA project on the website. And there are also periodical newsletters, and you can also collect here outside of the room brochure which presents all the fellows and the research projects. And in addition to the training networks, you have heard there is also the possibility of a Maria Sklodowska-Curie Action Individual Fellowship. Here, experienced researcher really choose the institution in order to pursue a certain project. And we have also here in this case the pleasure to have since few months with us Dr. Vasilis Anagnostatou, who is also here in the room. And she joined our group to work on a project Hippocrates, which is again trying to optimize detectors which could provide a combination of these techniques which I showed you before to make the imaging of a treatment by combining the radioactive decay of positron emission tomography with this energetic prone gamma emission. And if you want to hear more also about our project, you can also see outside the poster. And there are, of course, also more initiatives, but this was just a summary of what I would like to share with you. And concluding, I think we can say that 150 years after her birth, Marie Sklodowska-Curie continues to influence medical physics research. And in particular, you have seen that upon her legacy, the European Commission has launched this Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action, which is a very successful program which has really fostered mobility and career development of young researchers, providing excellent training and networking opportunities in several fields, including also the growing field of ion beam therapy. And Marie Sklodowska-Curie herself was really promoting education and training of young people of all countries and gender. And I would like also to make a quote taken from her. Therapeutic activity in such new field requires a strong base, which is constituted by physical and chemistry studies of new substances. If a base does not exist, theory becomes just empiricism and routine use of indiscriminately popular methods in which there are sometimes fundamental mistakes. This was, of course, mentioned in relation to the medical application of radioisotopes, but if you think to new modalities like our ion therapy, and if you maybe expand this into physics, biology, engineering, computing, you see that we need again a very strong education and very sound research in order to promote a sound application of these technologies to medicine. And with this, I wish us all a very fruitful International Day of Medical Physics and celebration of Marie Sklodowska-Curie, and I really hope for those Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action Fellows that you would get inspiration and motivation to pursue the excellent research and also to enjoy this training and networking opportunity that you have provided with. As I mentioned, Marie Sklodowska-Curie was really promoting research beyond borders and beyond across disciplines. And for those of you who were not aware of these opportunities, I really hope that you can also consider to take advantage of these opportunities made possible by the European Commission upon the legacy of this incredible woman and scientist. And with this, I'd like to conclude acknowledging Professor Carsten Welch, who is the coordinator of the OMA network and who promoted this birthday party initiative from the 3 locations, and as assistant, Madalena Klimontowska. And I'd like also to acknowledge Professor Manji Dozanji, who is the ENLIGHT coordinator, who provided me slides to show you the success of the ENLIGHT networks. And of course, support from LMU and afktv for the local organization. And I would like, if I manage to raise also some interest in ion therapy, besides thanking you, I would like also to advertise that next year the annual meeting of ENLIGHT will be held at UCL, University College London, who is, by the way, also a partner of the OMA network. And with this, thank you very much for your attention. Are there questions? If this is not the case, then I wish you a lot of success with the continuation of your school for those who are attending the Monte Carlo School of the OMA Fellows. And I thank all the others for coming, and hope you find it an interesting public event. Thank you.